Jordan's public debt is projected to maintain a downward trend in the next few years as the government presses ahead with economic reforms and a robust approach to trimming budget deficit.
Iraq's parliament votes unanimously for the biggest shake-up in its governing system, eliminating entire layers of government and giving Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi new powers.
And Google announces a surprise overhaul of its operating structure, creating a holding company called Alphabet to pool its many subsidiaries and separate web advertising from newer ventures. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news.
Good evening.
The Ministerial Economic Development Committee held a meeting chaired by the Prime Minister to discuss Jordan's debt management plan for the next 3 years. Finance Ministry Secretary General Izzeddin Kanakriya presented a briefing on the debt situation during the years 2012 to 2015, as well as plans to manage Jordan's debts until 2018. Jordan public debt is projected to maintain a downward trend in the next few years as the government continues to press ahead with a robust approach to economic reforms, leading to trimming the nation's debt and budget deficit, according to the meeting. Net public debt is forecast to go up by 7.7% this year, but this rise, as stated in the Finance Ministry report, is far below the 23.7% recorded in 2012. In 2016, the net public debt is expected to stand at 5.2% and at 2.6% in 2018, coupled with a 7% rise in GDP. By the end of the current year, the kingdom's public debt will constitute 81.7% of the GDP, amounting to 22.1 billion JDs, but is expected to decline to 74.1% of GDP in 2018, according to the report.
A ceremony to honor Jordanian businessmen on the occasion of the 30 years since the Jordanian Businessmen Association was established was held at the Royal Cultural Centre late yesterday. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour deputized for His Majesty King Abdullah at the ceremony, where he acknowledged the efforts of the association in national economic and investment activity and praised the existing partnership between the public sector and the business community, represented by the GBA. During the ceremony, the GBA founders, board members, as well as a number of leading businessmen and women received medals in appreciation of the long service to Jordan and to the national economy.
Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Joude discussed with World Food Programme WFP Executive Director Ertharin Cousin cooperation between Jordan and the organization, namely with respect to Syrian refugees. Joude pointed to a recent decision by WFP to cut food aid to Syrians in Jordan, saying such a move would have a negative impact on the Syrian community. Separately, Minister of State for Media Affairs and Communications Mohammed al-Momani urged an action plan to press donor nations to fund the agency's activities in the Middle East, mainly in the provision of aid to displaced Syrians. In a meeting with the WFP director, Momani said supporting the agency is an investment in regional peace and stability.
Russia and Saudi Arabia failed to overcome their differences on the fate of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a central dispute in Syria's civil war that shows no sign of abating despite renewed diplomacy. During their talks in Moscow, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Saudi Arabia and Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Jubeir discussed Syria, underlining the importance of resolving the crisis by political means. Lavrov and Jubeir also discussed bringing various opposition groups closer together to improve their chances in facing Daesh terrorists and better coordinate in international talks on solving the conflict. Lavrov said anti-Daesh forces united on the ground should have wide international backing, but Jubeir specifically ruled out any coalition with Assad. Moscow is looking to host another round of talks between Damascus and various Syrian opposition groups after 2 rounds of such consultations have failed to yield any breakthroughs.
We have discussed the crisis in Syria. We have underlined the importance of resolving the Syrian crisis by political means. We have also underlined that the position of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on Syrian crisis has not changed, and it is based on the provisions of the First Geneva Communique, and that the Syrian President Assad has no place in the future of Syria. But we have underlined the necessity of retaining the state and military structures after Assad.
Башар Асад не угрожает ни одной соседней стране, а ИГИЛ.
Bashar Assad does not pose any threat to any of the neighboring countries, but Islamic State poses a threat to Iraq, to Syria, to Saudi Arabia. Stating this publicly, they draw some sort of maps, this terrorist machine from Spain to Pakistan. So we all need to weigh which threat has a larger scale.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan vowed to continue military operations against Kurdish PKK fighters until not one terrorist is left. Erdogan was speaking at a military ceremony where he stressed that stopping gunfire would not be enough to maintain security. Turkey launched a fresh round of airstrikes against Kurdish militants in the southeast of the country as a group claimed responsibility for the bombing of a police station in Istanbul. Warplanes pounded 17 targets in the province of Hakkari over the past 2 days, part of a renewed crackdown on the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. The airstrikes followed operations yesterday in the eastern Agri province, which killed 7 PKK militants, according to the local governor's office. Meanwhile, the Turkish Foreign Ministry Undersecretary was quoted by CNN as saying that Turkey and the United States have agreed on the terms of a safe zone in northern Syria. The safe zone would allow U.S. and Turkish forces to hit Daesh or Kurdish militants if they entered the area.
In the ongoing battle against Daesh, the US-led coalition launched 30 airstrikes against the group in Iraq and Syria. According to US military statement issued today, 20 airstrikes were conducted against the terrorist group near 10 Iraqi cities, while in Syria the group was targeted with 10 airstrikes near 4 cities.
Iraq's parliament voted unanimously for the biggest shake-up in its governing system since the U.S. military occupation. The shake-up eliminates entire layers of government and gives Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi new powers. Several of al-Abadi's influential rivals will be stripped of official posts, including his predecessor Nouri al-Maliki, who will lose the job of vice president he has held since stepping down as prime minister last year after 8 years in power. This report has more.
Today's vote took place with a show of hands without discussion or objections, reflecting the pressure on lawmakers to act after Iraq's Shiite clerk, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, backed the reforms, calling on the Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to strike with iron fists against corruption. Sistani spoke following big protests in recent weeks triggered by public anger at power cuts and mismanagement of other services. But the Iraqi people expressed skepticism about these reform measures, some saying the government was just trying to placate people who are angry over lack of services and power cuts.
We want to make sure that the change is real and that the reform package approved today will be implemented.
A year in office, al-Abadi sought to transform a system which distributes posts to party leaders on ethnic and sectarian lines, which he says encouraged corruption, incompetence and political blackmail that were making the country ungovernable. Under the sweeping reforms, the 3 positions of vice president and 3 deputy prime ministers will be scrapped, removing offices that have become vehicles for patronage for some of the most powerful people in the country. Several ministries will be combined to eliminate cabinet posts, and al-Abadi will be given the power to fire provincial governors and regional officials who often wield more power in their territories than the central authorities. Sweeping reforms would also be made to the judicial system to encourage corruption investigations, and new rules on bodyguards will cut back politicians' security details.
Comprehensive and immediate reduction in the number of guards for all government officials, including those of the president, and referring the surplus to the defense and the interior ministries.
The reforms are the biggest move by al-Abadi to strengthen his own hand, even as large swaths of his country have fallen into the hands of Daesh terrorist group, and as the central government faces a financial crisis from the collapsing price of its oil exports. Farah Ajlouni for the News at 10.
The United Nations humanitarian chief, Stephen O'Brien, visited the Yemeni city of Amran to assess the humanitarian situation, saying his concern is for the welfare of the people who are caught up in the difficult times. His visit coincides with the end of a 3-day tour by the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, who said Yemen was crumbling under a deepening humanitarian crisis. O'Brien stopped by a school in Amran, where many people displaced by the fighting had taken shelter, and visited some damaged government buildings.
You can see from the devastation to the governor's offices and the municipal buildings behind me just what effects the conflict is having upon the infrastructure as well as the people here in this particular community.
Greece and its international lenders clinched a multi-billion euro bailout agreement after marathon talks through the night, raising hopes aid can be dispersed in time for a debt repayment. Falling due in days after a 23-hour session, Greek officials announced the two sides have agreed details of the deal, with a couple of minor issues remaining to be ironed out. Here's more.
Exhausted and weary, it looked like Greek Finance Minister Euclid Tsakalotos may even lack the energy to make it out the door. But after 23 hours of talks, Athens and its creditors may finally have a deal. Well, sort of.
Yes, there are one or two small issues, but we are almost there.
The main sticking points, at least, have all been overcome. Non-performing loans, the introduction of a new privatisation fund and, crucially, fiscal targets, with creditors not expecting a Greek budget surplus until 2016. European Commission spokeswoman Annika Breithart.
What we have at the moment is a technical level agreement reached by the staff of the institutions and the Greek authorities on the ground following the weeks of negotiations. What we don't have at the moment is a political agreement, and that is what we would need.
The deal still needs to be passed by the Greek Parliament and Eurozone finance ministers, but if so, it relieves Athens' most pressing burden. A €3.2 billion debt repayment to the ECB in less than 10 days. The worry is, though, the deal was rushed for that reason. CMC Markets' Jasper Lawler.
I think that's probably one of the biggest risks, is that this is just a bit short-termist. The creditors and Greece want to get away from the kind of turmoil that went into Greece failing to pay the IMF. But I think at the moment, while it doesn't have any kind of debt haircut involved, it's just more of the same, and it's almost destined to failure.
For the Greek markets, though, it seems any deal is better than none. The banking index surging 6% on news of the agreement.
And as Europe struggles with a migrant crisis, German Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière said he expects the number of asylum seekers to be considerably higher this year than the government initially estimated. He made the remarks after touring a police registration center for migrants in the Bavarian town of Deggendorf. The German Federal Office for Migration and Refugees has estimated that the number of the first-time and follow-up applications for asylum will this year be 450,000, which is more than double the number from the previous year. Europe's biggest economy is currently grappling with a record number of refugees, most of them whom are fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East region and Africa.
Egyptian legendary actor Noor al-Sharif passed away today at the age of 74 after a long battle with illness. Sharif is a staple of Egyptian television and cinema, with a resume that dates back to the mid-60s, earning him numerous awards. He is famous for roles as Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad, and the Umayyad Caliph Omar ibn Abdul Aziz. Sharif leaves behind his wife, actress Pusi, and two daughters, Sarah and May. His funeral will take place at the Shurta Mosque at the 6 October city tomorrow.
Google announced a major shake-up of its operating structure, creating a holding company called Alphabet. The surprise move appeared to be an attempt to let the company focus on its more creative and ambitious projects. The company said the new arrangement will take effect later this year.
They admit they're still getting used to the name, and now so will the rest of the world. The company known as Google is to become part of a new holding company called Alphabet. The revamped structure is likely to give greater insight into how much money is being made by newer ventures like Google X, which produced the unpopular Google Glass device. CMC market analyst Jasper Lawler.
Investors will have a better idea of how much money the core business is making, the search and advertising business, and how much money is perhaps being wasted or at least spent on some of these more slightly obscure research and development investment projects that some other arms of Google are investing in.
Along with the name change, there was some reshuffling of positions. Eric Schmidt will now be executive chairman of Alphabet. Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin will become CEO and president of Alphabet respectively, while longtime Google exec Sundar Pichai will now head up Google.
Maybe you could argue that sort of the strategic direction that Google's going to take is going to be slightly different because we've seen the founders move into positions on top of Alphabet.
The move could signal a shift towards more creative and ambitious projects like driverless cars. Other ventures that will be part of the new structure include connected home products maker Nest and its venture capital arm Google Ventures. Markets cheered the move. Google shares were up as much as 7% in after-hours trading.
Former International Olympic Committee Director General François Carrad has been appointed as chairman of the new FIFA Reform Task Force. Carrad will head an 11-person group charged with reforming the scandal-plagued FIFA. The 77-year-old Swiss had guided the IOC through its own corruption scandal following the vote of the 2002 Winter Olympics won by Salt Lake City.
Cristiano Ronaldo has posted a fantastic video of himself in disguise, showing off his football skills on the streets of Madrid. The Real Madrid star, one of the most recognizable sportsmen in the world, donned a wig, shades, a beard and a bodysuit as he headed out into the Spanish capital with a football. Looking more like a homeless man than a superstar of world football, he showed off some neat tricks and flicks. And while passers-by initially ignored the homeless footballer, once he revealed his identity, they all suddenly flocked back to the scene.
And finally, to the weather outlook. Moderate conditions continue for the rest of tonight with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, normal summer conditions are on the forecast in many regions, but it will be hot in the Jordan Valley with northwesterly moderate winds picking in the afternoon.
And in the Gulf of Aqaba, it should expect a hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Jordan's public debt is projected to maintain a downward trend in the next few years as the government presses ahead with economic reforms and a robust approach to trimming budget deficits.
Iraq's parliament votes unanimously for the biggest shake-up in its governing system, eliminating entire layers of government and giving Prime Minister Haider Ibadi new powers.
And Google announces a surprise overhaul of its operating structure, creating a holding company called Alphabet to pool its many subsidiaries and separate web advertising from new ventures. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan.
And I'm Louis Balkar. Thank you for watching and have a good night.
Good night.